Dwayne Wagner, Colonel retired, and we're going to talk today a little bit about military transition, but really we want to talk about what Dwayne's best at, and that's he's an educator. So he's going to educate us today on growing up black in America. So Dwayne is he spent a few years in the military. He's been an instructor of the year, and really a phenomenal guy. And I got to get to know him recently, and I'm better for it. So I want to share him with the world now. So Dwayne, welcome, and tell us about your where you came from.
Well, appreciate the invitation. I'm a military brat. My dad served 22 years in the Army from about 1950 to 1972. Served in Korea, Vietnam, and retired as a sergeant first class. So I was raised by a non-commissioned officer. What's unique about my father is he came from a family of sharecroppers in East Texas. And when he joined the Army about 1949, he didn't join the Army because he was patriotic. He joined the Army because he needed a job and he was tired of chopping cotton. So that's what brought my dad into the Army in 1949. And in 1950, with desegregation of the military, he integrated an all-white regiment in combat in Korea. So I am the son of a non-commissioned officer, served 30 years in uniform, mainly military police, personnel, corrections, spending most of my time in Washington, D.C., working policy issues, especially from 2001 to 2008. Transitioned in 2008 in Washington, D.C., and believe it or not, I used my military move to transition from DC to Leavenworth, Kansas, because I had the opportunity to teach at the Command and General Staff College. And I've been doing that for the last 11 years. I spend my days with captains and majors and civilians from the federal force talking policy, strategy, and leadership.
So you're some kind of big time mentor then, because you see how many 1,100 people a year you get to go through there. That's
Right.
that's
And
enormous.
that's a very good observation. I spent 3 years at Human Resources Command back in the day, PERSCOM, as an assignment officer for majors and lieutenant colonels. And I've been able to use that experience from the mid 90s with coaching and counseling and mentoring majors and lieutenant colonels to doing the same thing with captains and majors of the new generation, the generation that's been deploying repetitively back and back since 2001.
It's definitely constant. So I'll tell you, I'm grateful. I know the NCOs are grateful in the Army that see the leadership come out of the Command and General Staff College, and that's probably owed a little bit to you. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
So today we have a few slides that Dwayne gave us, so we can keep on topic because that's what we do here. But in the meantime, anyone watching live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, ask some questions. We'll break in on natural pauses or natural breaks. We'll ask Dwayne the tough questions. I'm sure he can handle it too because that's why you're here, right, Dwayne?
Yes, sir.
So do you want to kick off with your slides, or how do you want to do that?
First slide.
All right, so let me now. This is a new to me, but I'm gonna give it a shot. The whole slide thing, but just bear with me.
Take your time.
See here, the layout. So, see here.
And if the slide doesn't pop up, we'll be okay.
I think I'll make the slide work somehow, some way. And here we go. Now we see the slide here. Now the rest of us see the slide as well.
I can't see it.
You can't see a slide. Well, let me see here. Can you see it now?
Not yet. Is it the Black in America slide?
That's a slide.
Well, I will talk to that slide until we figure out a way to help me see it.
Sounds good.
As folks look at this visual, you'll see several photographs of me growing up Black in America. And as you take a look at the civil unrest we have in 2020, I want you to think about the 1960s and the civil unrest we had in the 1960s with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and those other leaders. Was it based on opportunity or oppression? And as we think about the current civil unrest in the 2020s, is it a function of opportunity or oppression? So when I talk to people about me and my life experiences, especially those who haven't grown up or spent time with many Black families or Black people, I like to say that if you have time for a cup of coffee, I have 17 stories I can share with you. Of course, we never get to all 17 stories, but what I try to do is to get people to understand that when I walk into the room, for some people, the first thing they notice is my race. The question is, how long do they notice my race and what is the impact to them? And in the audience, I believe, and this is my personal experience, and there are three groups of people listening in and watching right now, three groups of people. We have about a third who are very comfortable with others. They grew up with Black folks, Hispanics, Asians. They came from a multi-diverse background, and they are comfortable in their own skin, and they are allies. They are the sorts of people who do what's right and proactively look to make sure that everyone's being treated with dignity and respect. I think the second group of people who are tuning in today are good guys. They may not come from a diverse background. Their parents taught them to treat others with dignity and respect. They may have come into the Army or joined industry and they had no Black friends or Hispanic friends in their background, but yet they're just a good guy and they try to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. It's the third group of people I'm concerned about. About a third of us, I believe, carry bias, stereotypes, don't know how to treat others with dignity and respect, and they use confirmation bias to continue to think that way. That's where we're going to find people who are racist, who discriminate, who have trouble treating folks who don't look like them as well as they should. You're not going to find this theory in a book. This is just my take based on being 64 years old and Black for 64 years. I think people fall in different groupings. The challenge for the conversation we're having in 2020 is to get folks in all three groups to do some self-reflection on unconscious bias. Unconscious bias. We all need to self-reflect on that so we can be the best version of who we are. And I'm going to leave you with a mantra in transition. And this is a personal belief. Life is hard. Life is hard for all of us. Life is hard for all of us. Life is harder if you're poor. Life is harder if you're poor. It's my belief that in America, that life is hardest if you are poor and you are Black, and that's based on the historic, institutional, and systemic racism that has been in our nation since 1776 and before. We fought a war to move forward. We had the civil rights movement in the 1960s, but yet in 2020, we have Americans who still believe that we don't live in a society where people are judged by their character. We have Americans who believe that some of us are judged by the color of our skin, our race, our ethnicity. And it's my belief that regardless of your background of who you are, if you can understand that you have fellow Americans who don't feel valued, that all of us have a role in trying to make it better. Next slide, please.
And that's a good point, Dwayne. I mean, there's so many people that, and unconscious bias is a real thing, and if they understand that and look within themselves, whether how they were raised, how they were taught, how they were brought up, they can get over that unconscious bias and be not just better people, but better allies for everybody, right?
Right.
I'll go next slide. Now, this is the which part of the elephant are you touching? So this is looks fascinating. So please go ahead.
Well, so the parable kind of goes like this. There are 5 or 6 men in a village, blind men who had never seen an elephant. They knew an elephant was being brought to the village, and they wanted to touch the elephant, feel the elephant, smell the elephant, so they could understand the elephant. In this case, life experiences, each of us has a different touch, sensation, a smell of that elephant based on who we are. Your race, your ethnicity, your socioeconomic status, where you grew up, whether it's New York or California, all that impacts which side or part or piece of the elephant you're touching. The challenge we have as Americans, a multicultural, multi-diverse nation, is to understand that our fellow citizens have a different touch of that elephant and to respect their touch. The only way we can do that, I believe, is by talking to each other, having conversations, and putting our feet into the shoes of other men.
Yes, if we can do that, and this slide shows a 2020 civil unrest, and you see the whites versus racial minorities, police versus citizens, and business owners versus workers. So the people on the bottom here, I see that, and I know everybody sees that. How about the man up top? What's his role in this?
Good question. You can view that man or woe man on top differently. Is that society? Is that our government? Is that our president? Does he or she represent our governors and our mayors? Or is that person you, someone who can influence what's happening in our nation by having a conversation? So that person can be a little bit of anybody. The question is, what is he or she doing to make it better for everybody?
I like that point that the person on top can be us and how we, I guess, move everybody around and show different perspectives of that elephant. Because the elephant up front, you may see those tusks, you may see the snout, you may see that, but the person in the back,
right,
they may have a completely different, I guess, sense of the elephant by what comes out of it, right?
And let me share a different perspective with you. I'm 64 years old today. The conversation I'm having with you today would probably be different if I had it with you 20 years ago or if I had it with you 40 years ago. Because I've had the opportunity to touch that elephant during different times at different locations during my life. So 64-year-old Dwayne Wagner has a much better view of what that elephant entails as opposed to a 22-year-old Dwayne Wagner. And it's a challenge we have as we grow and mature and move forward. If you turn on Facebook and you see the conservatives and the progressives going at it, the Republicans and the Democrats, and all these different views, if you go back to the first slide, and I don't want you to move the slide,
okay,
there's a visual. On the left side of that slide is former President Barack Obama. On the right side of that slide is President Donald Trump. And in my class, I have a PE or drill where I put up a slide with former President Barack Obama, former President George Bush and President Donald Trump. And I share with my students that when each man gets up in the morning, they do what they think is best for America. You may disagree, but he is the President of the United States. The point being, we have to have conversations with people who are not like us if we're going to move forward. There are some in America who are concerned that the ability to do that is gone. Well, on social media it is, not face to face. What I want people to do is to meet 2 or 3 folks at a coffee shop who aren't like you, who don't have your background, and have a conversation face to face. Because on social media, it's too easy to yell at each other without listening.
Good point, because on social media, people just, they think that it's just words you're typing, but when you're in person, context comes out, emotions come out, just even body language comes out that's you can't have on social media. So I love taking conversations to the phone, to coffee, or even here with you today, Dwayne. These are great conversations to have. So there is one question that came by, if you don't mind. The question was, what would you say to people that are adamant that systematic racism doesn't exist?
Great question. And I'm going to answer it this way. In 2020, systematic racism or institutional racism is much less than it was in 1990 or 1960 or the 1920s or during the Reconstruction era. As we go backward and looking at how America has formed, there's been a lessening of systematic racism. But in 2020, we still have the vestiges of systematic racism, and we still have the lineages of systematic racism. So what does that mean? That means if you go into any large city, ask for the black section of town, cross the railroad track, and visit it. And what you will find are houses that were built during the same time of houses in the other part of town that are valued at 50 to 60 to 70% of those other houses in the white part of town or the suburb or the center of the city, just based on location. So redlining is much less apparent in America in 2020, but my relatives are impacted negatively by redlining based on the value of their home. The people who are vehement that institutional racism doesn't exist in 2020 want to compare it to what we looked like in the 60s, the 40s, and the late 1800s. It's different. It's not as prevalent, but yes, there is still some institutional and systematic or systemic racism in America. There are people who would disagree with me and say that's not true. So what should we do? Let's have a conversation about it over coffee. Let's take a look at policies. Let's look at impact. Let's look at opportunities. And if there are any changes that we need to implement at the local level within your town, your city, then we can do so. Jim Crow of yesteryear is a little bit different in 2020. It's much more sophisticated. And the last point or response I make to that is we have to separate institutional racism or systemic racism from personal racism. It's my belief that personal racism is the biggest challenge we have today in America. Not systemic racism, not institutional racism. We have leaders, community activists, and citizens who are working to chip away at systemic and institutional racism. It's the personal racism. If I don't like people from Des Moines, Iowa, and I know you're from Des Moines, Iowa, and you work for me, no matter what you can do, I'm not going to give you a promotion.
Hmm.
And I'm never going to tell you it's because you're from Des Moines, Iowa. That's what Black people, Hispanics, Asians, some other racial minorities and ethnic groups deal with in 2020. So right now, there's someone in the audience saying, hold up, Mr. Wagner. I'm white, I'm a male, and I got to tell you, Mr. Wagner, that I am watching others be promoted ahead of me. And I think the only reason it happens is because they're Black, or because they're a woman, or because they are from a certain ethnic group. I hear you. I understand what you're saying. And in some cases, you're absolutely correct. But I want to have a balanced conversation. No one wakes up in America in 2020 and say to themselves, oh my God, I want to be Black in America and poor because those people are treated so well. We've never had that in America. Most of us understand that within our nation, based on the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and discrimination, that it's much tougher. So I want to have a balanced conversation. I do understand there are those who say, well, what about me? I understand that. I really do. And I too look forward to the day when all of us treat each other just based on the content of our character and not race and not gender.
That'd be perfect. And you said there's a lot of key points you said right there. So if someone can go back and rewind and listen to that, that was phenomenal. Redlining, I didn't hear about that until this year, but when you look at it and actually do your research, you can look and you can see it actually exists. So I would ask anybody listening or watching later on to just open your mind up and do do your own research, get out of your own biases, do your own research and check it out. Before we go to the next slide, there is a question from Quentin Taylor. He asks, what are your thoughts on diversity versus inclusion in the military, Dwayne?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of goes like this. Diversity means you invite me into the room. Inclusion means you sit me at the table and you listen to my voice, you respect my opinion, and we have a conversation. So we can be diverse but not include, or we can have diversity and inclusion. It's my personal belief that within the military, we do a pretty good job of trying to get to diversity. We do a relatively good job of getting to diversity. It's my personal belief that we suffer when it comes to inclusion. And here's what I mean by that. Personal bias sometimes prevents a person from listening and embracing and understanding that person who is sitting at the table with them. And I'm going to give you an example. I've taught in 3 different venues during my life in the last 20 years. I noticed early on that if you put men and women in the same seminar or the same classroom, men tend to talk over women. That's been my observation. Why do men talk over women? There have been several studies to get to that. It's my personal belief that too many men do not value a woman's voice. So when there's a conversation going back and forth, instead of hearing and listening, it's too easy for the man to jump in there. Let me make this racial. There are some people who grow up a certain way and come into the military and they have not interacted with people of color. They have brought stereotypes with them. So when they start interacting with people of color or blacks or African Americans, because they already start off with a negative perspective, it's difficult for them to embrace. Let me tell a war story. It happened in 1999, but it's no different in 2020. In 1999, I'm a lieutenant colonel, just successfully commanded a military police battalion, selected for colonel, headed to the War College. I taught a 12-person seminar over 6 weeks. On graduation day, I'm drinking beer with 5 of my guys. All happened to be 5 white captains. One of the captains started crying. And we're drinking beer and he's crying. I said, "What's wrong with you?" And he looked at me and said this. He said, "Sir, 6 weeks when you walked into the classroom and I saw I had a black lieutenant colonel, I said to myself, what is this, excuse my language, nigger going to teach me?" Sir, you've been the best leader and instructor I've had during my life. I apologize for thinking of you that way. Now, mind you, tears are rolling down his face. The other 4 captains are flabbergasted that he's talking to me that way, and everyone's waiting to see how I'm going to respond. He finished with, "Sir, I grew up in Mississippi. We had black servants. I was taught that black people were inferior. And during my travels, my journey in the Army, I'm learning that's not true." So I looked at him, I said, "You're growing. You're going to be fine. Just keep growing." In 1999, a captain saw a black lieutenant colonel and didn't focus on the silver oak leaf. He responded based on his racial bias and the way he was brought up. Fast forward, in 2020, I have white peers, lieutenant colonels, who tell me that there's still some of that within our society.
That is powerful, Dwayne. 21 years ago, the same stuff happened from 50 years ago is still residual. And I think people have to understand that because it's still, although it's getting better, it still exists. Larissa M asks, and you may have answered this already, has systematic racism, or does it look different today than in the past? Now, you answered the question, but thank you, Larissa, for asking the question. You mentioned it's getting better, but it's still there.
Well,
Go
let
ahead.
me question, or I'm sorry, let me answer that question, because that's a different context and nuance, and it deserves to be. Yes, things are better in 2020. But what has happened is people are smart enough to keep their bias to themselves in most cases. So if I don't like people from Des Moines, I'm not going to tell you I don't like people from Des Moines. I'm just going to discriminate with people from Des Moines. So that's the difference we have in 2020. So someone in the audience right now is saying, "Well, Mr. Wagner, that's your own bias. How do you know that's true?" The reason I know that's true is because my white friends tell me. I have many friends within the service from the 70s, 80s, and 90s who go home, they deal with their relatives, and then they come back to the Army. It's my white friends who tell me that this still occurs. It's my white friends who are in other settings without blacks or Hispanics who are listening and talking to me. So let me put this in the perfect context, because I don't want to overblow it. 2020 is so much better than 1990. But yet in 2020, we still have some people with unconscious bias or stereotypes. Some of them know it and care. Some of them don't know it, and we need to make them aware. Now, I'm going to flip this coin, and sometimes this gets me in trouble. Everything's not racist. I'm going to repeat that. Everything is not racist. If I talk to 10 military officers about situations face-to-face, via email or social media, and we have a conversation about their efficiency report, the way their boss is treating them, or X, Y, or Z, by the time I finish with the conversation, I can convince 2/3 of them that you're dealing with life happens. You're dealing with a bad situation. It's not racist. My concern with our awakening in 2020, and we need to have this awakening, we have to be very careful, as former President Barack Obama said, not waking up in the morning looking to be offended. Because I can find a racist or racial prism for any negative situation if I look close enough. On the same side of that coin, because of the conversation we're having in 2020, I am noticing that some of my white friends who are senior leaders or executives are learning so much that they have to be careful not to overreact. And here's what I mean by that. Yes, I want you to be woke. I want you to be aware. I want you to understand how Black history or institutional racism influences us in 2020. I want you to reach out, coach, counsel, and mentor folks who don't look like you. But at the end of the day, you have to make the right decision for your organization, for the Army, or for you. So there's a balancing act we're having. The pendulum has swung, right now that pendulum has swung very far. There's going to have to be a correction. And we're just going to have to try to treat everybody with dignity and respect. Does that make sense?
That does, Dwayne. And you made so many good points there that I was trying to take notes. I couldn't keep up with it. There was so much going on and so much knowledge that you're telling us. Another question came in from Anthony Christoph. He asked, he may have missed this, but how did you respond to the captain that was prejudiced against you or prejudiced initially?
Yeah. I remained silent. I allowed him to talk. And when he finished, I asked him to continue growing, to continuing becoming a mature Army officer, and to reach out to others and to learn about their lives. The following day, I reported this situation to my colonel, and he looked at me and he said, "Dwayne, what do you want to do about it?" And I knew what he meant by that. He wanted to know if I wanted to discipline the captain or if I wanted to have him call forward to that captain's unit and report the captain. My response was, "Sir, do nothing. This man is growing. He felt comfortable enough with me to share the truth with me. He's going to be fine." I'm not concerned about that captain. I'm concerned about the person who's like that captain, but doesn't have enough self-reflection to realize that he or she is biased. That captain's going to be okay. It's the person who doesn't do the self-reflection I'm concerned about.
That is true, and you just changed that person's mind around for life, and he's going to help out the next generation of white people just to see it in a different perspective. And I think we have time for maybe two more slides. So give a favorite two.
So let's go to the next one that says, "Do you treat humans with dignity and respect?" Do you see that one?
Yep, I see it right here, and we'll go live and we'll hit it up. So here it comes. It's on the screen now for you.
Okay, I still can't see it.
Still the elephant though.
That's what we're doing fine. I want every person in the audience to ask themselves what others say about their reputation. Because here's where we are. My white friends will say, "Dwayne, I'm not racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body." And my response will be, what will your friends tell me? What will your Black friends tell me? What is your reputation? Because all of us only think the best of ourselves. Some of us have an inability to understand that we are not as good as we think we are. So as we continue to have this conversation on race in America, it's all about treating people with dignity and respect, and how do others see you.
Wow, I tell you, you can reflect on that just as being a soldier for 25 years myself, and you for 30. Just looking back and seeing what kind of impacts we had over our careers, we can probably say, I could have done better here. I could give more opportunity here. So I know I'll reflect, and I may share some stories about my reflections. I hope others share the same thing. So there's one more question, but you want to hit one more slide first before we're.
Let's go ahead and take the question.
All right. So the question is, individually, how can I do better, or how can I do better as a man, and preferably as a white man, Dwayne?
Okay. I want you to find the slide that says, do you invest in people from the other America? Do you invest in people from the other America?
Here we go. We're showing it right now with Monty Pickens.
Okay, Monty Pickens. When that picture was taken on the left-hand side, I hated that man. I hated that man because he was mean to me. I later learned that he was mean to me because he cared enough about me to develop. What I want you to do is to be Monty Pickens. Monty Pickens was a good old boy from West Virginia who went to Vietnam, was awarded the Silver Star, and later was my boss, my mentor, and my friend. He spent 30 years in the military reaching out to black officers and female officers who had potential and who had promise to make sure that we had opportunity. Why did Monty Pickens do that? Monty Pickens knew that he had peers who were racist. Monty Pickens knew he had peers who would not hire a black captain or major for their battalion or brigade. So Monty Pickens put his arm around me, and for about 12 years steered me to certain locations or people to make sure I was taken care of. What does taken care of mean? That means give me or you an opportunity to serve well. If I don't do the job, then I don't do the job. But Monty Pickens was all about opportunity. On the right-hand side, you'll see the obituary. I met that man in 1988. In 2015, my wife and I flew from Leavenworth, Kansas to West Virginia to bury him. Loved him like a father. That's what I want you to do. He proactively and consciously mentored black officers because he understood institutional racism and he wanted to do the right thing. And oh, by the way, he grew up with some stereotypes that he had to work through when he came into the Army. Does that answer your question?
That does, and I'll tell you. So this is more than just giving to a charity, shopping at a business. This is about bringing up people that don't look like us to give them opportunities or show them how we, I guess, achieve things in our lives, right?
Right.
And it seems, Dwayne, that seems simple. It does. So let's give people the opportunities just to get the opportunities we have, and don't be biased towards anybody just because of the color of their skin or where they're from.
Right. But let's have a balanced conversation. It's tough. There are 6 pieces of pie and 7 people. All 7 deserve the pie. If the 7th person doesn't get the pie and happens to be black, did he not get the pie because he's black? Or did he not get the pie because there wasn't enough pie? Let's go to the slide that says, do you invest in others who do not look like you?
So I'll go to slide next. Check this out. And here we go. It's showing now for us.
The message I want to send with this slide is I had a responsibility to talk to younger officers about race and diversity in the Army, so when they would grow up to be senior leaders, they would understand. In 1987, Captain Mark Spindler picked my family up from the Frankfurt airport. He was my sponsor in Germany in 1987. I promoted him to major in 1995, 1996. And in 2014, you see Brigadier General Spindler as a guest speaker at a military ball in Kansas City. He was one of my mentees or proteges who became a friend, who I think will tell you that I was one of his mentors. I am hoping that my influence with Captain Spindler allowed Colonel Spindler and Brigadier General Spindler to have a better view of racism, diversity, and inclusion. And I will tell you that he and I had some deep conversations over beer. My point, if you are a black officer, or you are a female officer, reach out to others who are not like you, who do not look like you, who do not have your experience, and spend time having them understand. And if you are a white male, spend more time listening and seeing and less time talking. Now, I get in trouble sometimes because people say, well, Dwayne, you're hard on white males. And my response is, in my 30-year career, the vast majority of my mentors were white males. They reached out to me. They embraced me. They took care of me. I am not beating up white males because of X, Y, or Z, but they are the demographic who has to reach out for cross-racial and cross-gender mentoring. Because right now, black officers and female officers, in specific, believe they're being ignored. And I transitioned with former Chief of Staff of the Army, General Ray Odierno, said in public forum that one of the biggest challenges we have in our Army is that white officers are not mentoring black officers. The Chief of Staff of the Army said that in public forum. I want you to think about that statement. When he said that, hallelujahs went all over the world because we knew that. We understood that tribalism was causing people to only mentor those who looked like them. And we have to get past that. Does that make sense?
That does, and I just showed the slide, and that's important. That's important that we talk about that, and it showcase, because it is true. So the more we mentor people that don't look like us, more people overall will have the opportunities to advance themselves and their families in this culture, because we're all Americans. Let's act like it and come together as one. Dwayne, this has been a powerful 45 minutes for me, and I know most of the viewers as well. I know I'll continue self-reflecting and seeing what I can do better, and how I was growing up in the military, good, bad, or indifferent, because it's going to shape myself and hopefully others around us. So I'll give you the final word, Dwayne. Take 10 seconds or a minute and just tell people, because I look forward to bringing you on hopefully soon, because this wasn't enough time for me.
Well, we only got to 2 stories. I have 15 more. What do you see? What do you see behind me?
I see an American flag behind you.
There's a reason I positioned my camera for the American flag behind me, because I'm an American. My ancestors built this country. My father fought in Korea and Vietnam for this nation. And by the way, my father had bone spurs, and I'm gonna leave it at that. My people built this nation. My father served in this nation. I wore the uniform for 30 years. This is my nation. This is my country. And we need to find a way for all of us to embrace each other, talk to each other, and have a conversation. And I look forward to coming back and and talking with you. My last comment is I love John Snyder. If you didn't know that, you need to know that.
John Snyder's a great guy, and you made more powerful points. Colonel Wagner, I haven't saluted anybody in about 18 months because I've been out of uniform, but I'll tell you what, as we go off air today, I will salute you because this has been a great experience for everybody. So, Colonel Snyder, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to having you on with your 13 or 15 more stories to talk to us about, all right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.